Sometimes it's not enough for a video game to expect a certain level of expertise out of a player, and occasionally a title has to rub salt into the wound by telling you just how big of a failure you are. You thought making the same mistake over and over again was bad, but how about if the game points it out to you? I'm Cy for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games that mock bad players. Number 10, Streets of Rage 3. The second game in the Streets of Rage series gets the most praise, and for good reason. However, whilst it released in the waning years of Sega's 16-bit console, Streets of Rage 3 provided a solid follow-up experience. Like several titles of the era, Streets of Rage 3 ends early and removes its final few stages for its more inexperienced players. At the end of stage 5 of 7, the game comes to an unexpected end where most of the story strands aren't resolved and the game badmouths you to boot. The defeated robotic boss of the previous stage slyly remarks, "You play this game like a beginner," before ceasing function. Firstly, this is clearly adding insult to injury for proud gamers who resign themselves to playing on easy because they were struggling with the difficulty the game boots up with. However, in Japan, this easy difficulty is Streets of Rage 3's normal mode, so you might well think bad of yourself for picking the easier route through the Mega Drive beat-em-up, but you're actually playing what is a standard difficulty overseas and you still get mocked for it. Come on, be a big strong Western video gamer and play on a harder difficulty setting next time. Number 9, Batman Arkham Asylum. Game over screens are an underrated thing because many of them are iconic. If you're not up to the game's standards of skill, you're going to be seeing them over and over again, so let's hope the developer made them good. Rocksteady certainly did with the Arkham series by putting the villain that finally broke Batman in the spotlight to show a mocking remark or a celebration of their victory. This list wouldn't be right without these classic scenes, which, to be fair, are actually pretty awesome. After all, Batman ostensibly has the best catalogue of villains in comic book history, so giving them even a little more screen time is always good. So popular was this edition that it returned in every sequel with more variety every time. However, they're awesome at first. If you're finding yourself failing repeatedly, especially in a particular spot, these handful of voice lines lose their luster pretty quickly. As charming as they once were, it's pretty easy to start taking the insults of the Penguin, Bane and Harley Quinn personally. Heck, in Arkham City, some of the Joker's game over screens are just the Clown Prince of Crime outright laughing at your misfortune. No quick jab, just a mocking guffaw. In many ways, a literal last laugh. Number 8, Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge. This particular entry does something that few games do, and that's mock some very specific bad players. The original secret of Monkey Island was criticised by the press for being abstract with painfully complex puzzles. Admittedly, point-and-click adventure games are very much a love them or hate them kind of affair, but if you're a fan of the genre, tough puzzles are usually a selling point more than something to be wary of. As such, when it was time for LucasArts to make the sequel, they decided to add 2 different difficulty modes, one of which was titled Monkey 2 Light, and was paired with the description, "I've never played an adventure game before, I'm scared." To make matters especially clear, the back of the box stated that this mode was intended for beginners and, quote, magazine reviewers. This mode strips down the game's many puzzles, or in some cases entirely removes them, so the players can get almost zero satisfaction for a job well done, and most of the mode essentially amounts to walking from room to room until the game is over. Furthermore, missing scenes cut because of removing puzzles make the end of the game thematically dissatisfying as well. Basically, Monkey Island 2 demanded you respect it, or it forced you to wonder why you'd bothered by withholding all the good stuff. Number 7, Devil May Cry. Whilst the hack-and-slash adventure Devil May Cry franchise is notoriously hard, the first title has a pretty insulting fix for players that are struggling out of the gate. If Dante uses a Vital Star to patch up his injuries, or in fact dies and must use a few yellow orbs to revive himself in the first few missions of the game, Devil May Cry will sheepishly ask the player if they want to activate Easy Automatic mode. This setting is quite ridiculous in the amount that it moves the goalposts, making the player stronger, able to pull off strings of context-specific combos with simple repeated taps of the melee button, and it turns Dante's sidearms into essentially fully automatic bullet hoses. Furthermore, the game takes out a few of the more tough enemies just to be safe. The problem is, once you've opted to go this route, you can't undo it. Even finishing the game in Easy Automatic doesn't let you swap your difficulty, and any New Game Plus run you might attempt commits you to the dead end of the game essentially holding your hand in every single aspect. You made this choice and Devil May Cry won't let you forget it. If you want to play the game as intended, then you need to delete your save and start all over again. Number 6, Final Fantasy VII. When players return to Final Fantasy VII's amusement park, Gold Saucer, after their first visit, they'll be able to take on the Battle Square. This series of fights pits Cloud's Strife against a roster of opponents in hopes of racking up as many points as possible before the end. If they fail to make it to the end of the Battle Square's offering of monsters, the player will instead get a consolation prize in the form of a tissue. Whilst technically speaking the item does have a use, it's not one for the player and instead is a way for the game to track how many times Cloud has attempted the minigame. But this is something the game could have done under the hood. It didn't need to give you an item to sit in your inventory for this fact. And it certainly didn't need to make that item a tissue. The implication is pretty clear. Use this tissue to dry your pathetic little tears because you're not hardy enough to hang with the big boys. The item description even references it being a little tough, and in Japanese it translates closer to heartbreaking. You may well have gone into the Battle Square with the hopes of collecting enough points for Cloud's ultimate limit break, but if it gave you issues, it merely had tissues for you. Number 5. Katamari Damacy. For the uninitiated, Katamari Damacy asks the player to roll an alien object around various environments that sticks to anything it passes over with the hopes of growing a gigantic ball, or katamari, of wonderful nonsense. Basically, it's bizarre, but it's also pretty brutal when it feels like you haven't done enough. If the player fails to put together a big enough katamari, they are brought before their father, the king of all cosmos, who's in a particularly somber mood. As rain falls and thunder claps, the protagonist weeps on his hands and knees, almost begging for forgiveness. Standout lines from the king's rant about your nasty katamari include, "This is not your fault, but ours for believing in you, and we should have asked your cousins instead." To top it all off, he asks the player to forget about everything and go away. When a video game tells you to give up on it, then it really makes you question what you're doing with your free time. There's a prevailing air of we're not angry, we're just disappointed. For a title so wonderfully weird and cheerfully charming, Katamari Damacy sure knows how to tap into some deep-rooted traumas we all have. We all have them, right? This game didn't just personally affect me, right? Number 4. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. When talking about obtuse puzzle solving, point and clicks are one thing, but the classic text-based RPG is in its own realm. The 1984 adaptation of Douglas Adams' legendary sci-fi comedy novel, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, is a prime example of the genre being devilishly difficult and having no qualms about it. Heck, the first puzzle of the game is a string of inputs that are almost impossible to guess. This one doesn't kill the player, but it does stop them from finishing the game later, as they missed their one chance at grabbing the automatic language translating Babelfish item. When players do die during the course of their journey through space, in some instances the game carries on without them. If the player attempts to intervene in the story or make any contribution, the game will simply write back, "You keep out of this, you're dead." Much like the books, the video game feels like it has a mind of its own, and it's disturbingly easy to picture it laughing at you as it carries on its merry way without the player. If you think about it too much, it's a rather concerning lesson about perceived control. Where you'd expect a game to end at your own demise, it does not, and mockingly goes on without you. Number 3. Metal Gear Solid 5. The Phantom Pain. The Metal Gear Solid series has never taken itself too seriously. Sure, the plotline might involve all manner of the horrors of war, but it's the contrast that allows its more wacky elements to truly pop. Everyone remembers Solid Snake's habit of crawling around in cardboard boxes precisely because it's set to the backdrop of political turmoil and secret warfare. The games have also very rarely babied themselves for their audience in any way, and in fact MGS is renowned for some of its more punishing optional difficulty settings. However, Metal Gear Solid 5 does have one item that is designed to make things easier on players that aren't as experienced or perhaps simply as skilled as others. Upon multiple failures, the game will ask players if they want to equip the chicken hat. This item makes Snake harder to detect and nigh on impossible to kill. Sure, it'll cap your mission rankings at a maximum of A, but at least now you can get through the game, right? As long as you don't mind looking like a buffoon. Number 2. Duck Hunt. Perhaps an originator when it comes to games that make fun of the player to the point of rage. When you picture the NES classic Duck Hunt, it's highly likely that a very specific pose comes to mind, the laughing visage of the dog. Now, humanity loves dogs, and gamers have had their heartstrings tugged by pooches in the likes of Fable, Fallout, and Nintendogs. Very rarely do you hear people talk about their love of the Duck Hunt dog though, and that's because of all the universally deep-rooted hatred for the mutt. If you fail to hit either target in each brief round of Duck Hunts, your dog can't help but find this amusing, and, rather like Dick Dastardly's sidekick Muttley, laughs at your failure. Whilst you might think that the dog is on your side, grabbing the ducks you've downed and showing off your power, it'll just as easily turn on a dime if you miss and cackle at your poor aim. Thankfully, the Duck Hunt dog made his debut in the Smash Bros. Series as a commemoration of light gun games of the era. In actuality, their appearance was probably more celebrated by players looking to finally get their own back on the chuckling canine with a well-placed Falcon Punch. Number 1. Ninja Gaiden Black. The Ninja Gaiden series has always had a passion for brutally hard gameplay. Whether it was the NES originals or the relaunch in the mid-2000s, players tended to know that they should keep away from the games if they weren't confident in their skill. That doesn't mean that some entries in the series didn't find the quickest and most humiliating ways to beat any confidence out of you if you thought you were hot stuff. In 2005's Ninja Gaiden Black, danger and therefore death come thick and fast during the title, and having Ryu Hayabusa crumple at the situation before him a mere 3 times will throw a prompt the player's way. Do you choose to abandon the way of the ninja? Selecting yes shows a cutscene where Ryu's ally Ayane lets her disappointment known, which is something that carries on into the unlocked Ninja Dog mode. Ayane berates the player every step of the way, but on the plus side they do get a sweet new accessory. The Band of Strength pink ribbon is an insulting mark of dishonour, but the buff to damage and Ryu's fashion sense is at least some respite. To be fair, this difficulty is actually still a decent challenge for novice players that is truly designed to help them get better. It just so happens to chastise them on their way to that betterment. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of the video in the comments below. Were you mocked by any of these classic games? And let us know, of course, any that we might have missed. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.